Well, hello, everybody, and welcome back. My name is Arlene Pytranton. I'm CEO of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and I'm the current past chair of SES. This year, in that role, I've had the honor of chairing SES's nominating committee. The committee is charged with identifying and presenting to the membership a slate of highly qualified candidates through the lens of personal and organizational diversity that is reflective of and beneficial to our SES community of individuals to serve on the SES board. As past chair, one of my final official duties today will be to introduce the new board of directors. These are individuals who will assume their roles and responsibilities at the end of this Access 21 conference. I'm very pleased to introduce to you these 4 incoming new members at large to the board of directors. I think these faces are hopefully familiar to so many of us. They've been very active members and contributors to our community for some time now. So join me in welcoming Melissa Garcia from the Society for Neuroscience, Elena Gersman with Informs, Frank Kraus from the Federation of American Societies for Experimental Biology, and Rebecca Straka, who is with the Society of Petroleum Engineers as our incoming board members. I also want to take a moment to review with you the individuals who are serving as officers of SES for the 2021-2022 year. I'm going to start in that lower left corner and acknowledge our friend and colleague, Beth Cunningham. Beth has served on the board as a director at large and will now be assuming the role as secretary treasurer. Going to the upper right corner, another familiar face, Todd Osman. Todd has been serving as secretary treasurer and now moves into the vice chair role. You can see in the lower right corner, our current chair, the awesome Nicole Boston, who will be moving into the role as past chair. And in the upper left corner, the amazing Bob Chalker, who will be serving us as our board chair for this coming year. Let's also take a moment and look at the total mix of directors at large for next year. In addition to Melissa, Elena, Frank, and Rebecca, who will be coming onto the board, we want to acknowledge and be sure to thank Con Vu, Matt Miller, and Mona Miller. By the way, no relationship, I'm told, between Matt and Mona. Those individuals will be continuing their service as directors at large. So please, I see a lot of comments in the chat. Join me in acknowledging and thanking these individuals for continuing to serve SES with their time and talent. And now I want to take a moment and acknowledge a very special person, Nicole Boston. Nicole, your persistence, your patience, your passion, your steadfast and resilient leadership has truly been a North Star for SES during a very unusual year. I know so many of you have made a point of getting to know so many of us, and we are very grateful for your innovative, bold, collaborative, and truly exceptional leadership. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you well during our overlapping terms on the SES board, and I can truly say I have never heard you say anything but, yes, I'd be delighted whenever you were asked to do anything on behalf of SES or this community. We are very grateful. And that includes the fact that, as some of you know, Nicole was very willing, thankfully, to accelerate her leadership, her officer experience with SES a couple of years ago when a vacancy on the board necessitated her moving more quickly from position of secretary treasurer into that of vice chair. SES is deeply grateful to you, Nicole. We are so fortunate that you have been in this role this year. And we all, please, everyone join me in a round of applause and appreciation for Nicole. Nicole, I do believe that token of Cess's appreciation for your year as chair might have been sent to you recently. Is that the case?
I don't know if you can you see it?
Well, not yet. Well, let's see. Now I can.
Now
Yes.
you can. All right.
Excellent.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
We are so grateful to you. Thank you, Nicole.
All right. Well, thank you, Arlene, and thank you to the CES community for giving me this wonderful opportunity this past year to work with all of you and lead through what was truly a remarkable year. I want to especially thank the board members who, Arlene, you just recognized. They showed up, they gave their time and energies in which was already an extremely difficult year managing their own organizations to ensure that CES's strategic priorities shifted and evolved to reflect the new challenges we were facing. So thank you, Arlene, Bob, Todd, Beth, Matt Miller, Con, Jonathan Goodwin, Mona Miller, thank you so much. And I couldn't have pulled it off. We couldn't have pulled this all off without the amazing AMC team led by Louise Risto, including Liz, Chris, Sarah, Anna, Colleen, and Dave. Your exceptional standards for quality and commitment to CES have contributed in so many ways this year. From the frequent conversation circles we've had, the special interest groups that were formed or enhanced, webinars that were launched. We had 2 virtual conferences this year in addition to this one, including the CEO meeting that had the highest turnout, at least in my recent memory. And I think this is about my 7th year with CES. We had professional development with the Association 101 led by Matt Miller that was sold out, and a new partnership with McKinley Group that had our CEOs and our volunteer leaders and had great feedback on that. We also did some of the more mundane work of revising our bylaws and policies. And just recently with Dave Bergeron's help, we were able to get an 18-month strategic plan in place for the next board coming in tomorrow and for the CES community. So for all that and so much more, I want to thank the AMC team and Luis. And also tell all of you that it's been a real honor and privilege. I've learned so much, and I'm looking forward to serving under Bob's leadership starting tomorrow. I'd also like to thank Arlene and Jonathan Goodwin from AOAC International for your service to CES. Jonathan and Arlene, we appreciate your outstanding contributions while on the board, and we value your dedication to the CES community. But before we begin the Access or final Access 21 session, I want to take this moment to acknowledge and honor a special colleague of ours and invite all of you to please join me in celebrating Arlene Pietrantens on her upcoming retirement. Most of you have heard the news by now, I am sure, and so many of us in the STEM community have had the pleasure of collaborating with you, Arlene. You've been instrumental in advancing our industry with your knowledge, your compassion, and your willingness to help others. When we were talking about doing something here, the one comment that really stuck out to me was one of your colleagues who said, "She's so human." And I think that just really says it all. You have been a very strong and a very positive voice for so many of us. So I'd like to share my heartfelt thanks for your guidance and your mentorship. I would not be here without you. And we have, you should have received a gift box as well in the mail, and we'd like you to open it in front of our Access audience and members. And while you're doing so, for those of you, hard to imagine you wouldn't know Arlene, but she has been the head at ASHA for the past 17 years. While she's been there, she's transformed and expanded services and resources to ASHA members and enhanced its position as a leader in the healthcare and education policy realm. And as a CES community, we wanted to share our token of appreciation for all that you've done, Arlene. So inside are words of encouragement and congratulations from so many of your STEM Society colleagues that you've impacted. So we're sure that you'll be receiving many more messages in the weeks and months to come, and now you'll have a special place to hold them. And we want to really wish you an enjoyable retirement with your friends and family, whether it's at the beach or wherever your journeys take you. We hope we I hope they take you back to SAS and maybe, maybe even in February, and we know we'll still be seeing you down the road. So we, again, want to congratulate you on a wonderful career. We're going to miss you, and we wish you the best.
I just want to say, those of you who know me know I am seldom speechless. You have really caught me off guard. I was not in any way expecting this, and I just can't think of a more meaningful and appreciated gift from you all. Thank you. This is so thoughtful. I will read and cherish every one of these. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Arlene. Now I want to share my thanks with all of you, our attendees and partners, for making the last 2 days together so meaningful. Although we could not see each other face to face, I've enjoyed our conversations and looking forward to continuing them beyond Access. So without further ado, we are ready to kick off our last session on lessons learned during the pandemic. Before we dive into that, I want to thank our gold partner, Wiley, for their support and invite them to take to the virtual stage at this time.
I'm really passionate about children and young people's mental health research. If we can identify problems early and intervene in ways that work, we can really change the trajectory of children's lives. I had a fairly ordinary but happy childhood. Going to university in Oxford, I was very aware of how privileged I was and how much comes down to luck and the opportunities that we have during our childhood. That had an impact on the work that I've ended up doing now, which is all about trying to make sure children do get all the opportunities that they can and are not held back by things like anxiety.
Coronavirus, a global health emergency. In all parts of the UK, schools are closed.
In response to the pandemic, we've been looking much more broadly at children and young people's mental health. With my colleague Polly Waite, we started the CoSpace study, which has been tracking children and young people's mental health throughout the pandemic. A number of sources of data now suggest that the pandemic has had a negative impact for a number of reasons, including school closures, social restrictions, and other challenges that families may have had to face. We've been feeding back the data from CoSpace to policymakers and practitioners so that it can influence the decisions that they make. We've also used it ourselves to drive further research to get help to families that need it. The way that I think my work's had most impact is through increasing access to treatment. We developed a form of treatment where we coach the family so that parents are empowered to help their children. During the pandemic, the online version of this treatment, Aussie, has proved to be really helpful because we've been able to provide treatments to families remotely so that families can get help when they first need it, rather than waiting and risking symptoms persisting and potentially becoming more severe as time goes on.
The anxiety made me feel worried and nothing would overcome the fear in my head. But then we started at OSI and that helped me control it.
It's a very special feeling to feel that you are doing work that might make a difference to someone's life. Over the last decades, we've seen child and adolescent mental health difficulties on the rise. It often takes decades for research to have an impact on practice. I wanted to be part of research that could bring about much quicker changes so that families can get the help they need.
Thank you again, Wiley, for your partnership with SAS. And I think you are all probably familiar with these technical reminders, but we're just showing them one more time. And if you do need any assistance, please reach out to Results Direct and the SAS team, and they're available to help you. So this afternoon session that I'll be moderating, you're going to hear from Arthur Evans, the CEO of APA, the American Psychological Association, Elena Gersman, the Executive Director of Informs, which is the Institute for Operations Research and Management Sciences, and Arlene Pietranton, CEO of ASHA, the American Speech Language Hearing Association. I want to share an interesting fact that I just learned when we were prepping for this panel, that all three of our panelists, not just Arthur, have a doctorate degree in psychology, which I think might have given them a slight advantage in navigating the last 18 months, where our psyche and our sanity has been tested along with our business operations. So as the session description noted, there was a great quote by Julie Bornstein, CEO of the Yes, in Fast Company, where she shared one of her unexpected lessons from 2020 was that she learned that adults don't go to work just to work. We don't send our kids to school just to learn, and people don't go to restaurants just to eat. Human interaction is essential for our well-being, even if technology has advanced to a place where we don't technically need to go to places. So before we get started, we're going to open up a poll question and ask all of you, what lessons have you learned? Have you learned valuable lessons over the 18 months that you might not have learned had there not been the pandemic? So we're going to open that up and see. Are we going to open that up? So the answers, there you go. I learned a lot. I learned a number of valuable. I learned some, or I don't think I learned anything. And we'll give it a few seconds here and see how our team feels. Okay. And I'm not sure. How do we see those results? Ta-da, no surprise. I was gonna say, if anyone said, didn't learn anything, they would have had to have been under a rock the last 18 months. So yes, there's been a lot of learnings, and we really wanted to take this time to talk to some of the CEOs and leaders in the organizations, especially as things are transitioning. And I'll say, the first to say that the world and the situation wasn't the same a week and a half ago when we had our prep session than it is today. And that's probably going to continue to be the norm. So Elena, let's start with you. You work for Informs, a professional society that advances and promotes the science and technology of decision-making to save lives, save money, and solve problems. And you've been an executive at large at STEM organizations like IEEE and ASME, and serve on the board of ASAE, and about to start on CES's board tomorrow. And this is your first executive director role. You also interviewed and started your current job in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So you've dealt with the remote aspects as well. We wanted to ask, what unexpected lessons from 2020 did you learn given this relatively unique perspective?
It's a great question. I mean, it's because this is my first executive director role, this is all I know. So I was once on a session a few months ago talking with a bunch of CEOs, and one of them said, you know, this is the hardest year I've had being a CEO, and he'd been a CEO for 20 plus years. And I'm thinking, this is all I know. You know, all I've known is COVID, working from home, figuring out remote work policies. So I think in one way that made it easy. And the first, I just finished 1 year this week. So the first 6 months, I was like, I think this is the same. It would be the same if I'm in person or not. You know, I'm just doing, Zoom calls. And it was the second 6 months when it hit me that things are slower because I don't have the interactions. I've only met one person on the board of directors so far, and that's just because he's local to me in New Jersey. So not having that interaction, I think, has really hurt my learning, slowed down my onboarding with that. And the other thing is just trying to figure out what it means to come out of this pandemic. So for example, some folks that are saying, well, what about staff productivity? And I have to say, I don't know. I don't know what staff productivity was like before the pandemic. I only know what it's now working with now, which seems fine and really good. The other thing is the lesson learned is building trust on a screen is different than building trust in person. So now we're coming back in person a bit. So now it's like I'm feeling like I have to build those relationships again that I started on Zoom on a screen in person. So let me leave it at that. I think those are a few lessons I've learned.
Thank you, Elena. Arlene, before I ask you to share your thoughts, let me remind our audience a bit about you. As we shared a few minutes ago, you recently announced your retirement as CEO of ASHA after 17 very successful years and many more in association leadership. And you're about to rotate off the CESA's board after serving as an officer. Given your perspective as a veteran and seasoned CEO, what are your unexpected lessons from the past 18 months?
I don't know if they are new learnings, but they were deep affirmations of a number of things that I believed and or assumed. To follow up on something Elena said a moment ago, the element of trust. So many of you have heard me speak about the intentionality of the culture at ASHA. It's not necessarily the right one for every organization, but it is one that we've been very intentional about. And all of us, and I know the word's overused, but all of us in our respective roles and organizations had to pivot quickly. And when we found ourselves having to do that mid-March of 2020, we were gearing up for it, but we had to make the decisions and move into that all remote space a little bit faster than we thought we were going to have to. And the sense of community and connectedness and the trust that we had with one another was essential to us being able to do that. So it was really affirming for me to be thoughtful and intentional about relationships within the organization. And then another piece that shouldn't have been a surprise, but was certainly for me anyway, really affirmed over these last several months is that uncertainty can create a great deal of anxiety. And this is a very uncertain time. It has been and continues to be in terms of public health and personal safety, some people in terms of job security, et cetera. So we changed, we really upped the level of communication and the specificity. And we made some decisions about things that we would or wouldn't do because we could make some of those decisions. And for example, we set dates certain where we said, we will be all remote until at least this date. And we will tell you 4 to 6 weeks ahead of that, whether it's going to change or not. We were trying to build in some level of certainty that people could count on. We were fortunate that we did not have to look at the possibility of reducing hours or eliminating positions. And we told people that straight out. We told them how we were handling the challenging financial element of last year, but we tried to add that certainty in. And then the last thing that I learned or affirmed is it's really important as leaders to be able to toggle in among different styles. Not every style is right in every situation. We are a very collaborative workplace, and we make a lot of decisions in a team-based environment, including what we call our facilitating team, which has shared leadership responsibility with me as a member of the team and not the final decision maker in most instances. But there were times over these last 16 months when we moved out of that, where it did become decision-making from the top or distributed decision-making, who has responsibility for making what decisions. But we were transparent and forthright about that to say, we're moving out of this style for right now, and then to say, okay, we're moving back into our preferred style. So I'll stop there.
All right. Thank you, Arlene. Arthur, you have been at the helm of APA since 2017, and before that, you spent more than 12 years in Philadelphia as the Commissioner of Behavioral Health and Intellectual Disability Services, leading a $1.2 billion healthcare organization. Served as clinical faculty at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, and prior to that as Deputy Commissioner of Connecticut's Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, as well as Associate Clinical Professor in Psychiatry at Yale School of Medicine for 13 years. Given this rich background with experience in much larger institutions and ecosystems, what unexpected lessons from 2020 did you learn?
Well, I like my colleagues, I learned a lot over the last year. I think at the top of the list is that our capacity to change is much greater than we give ourselves credit for. Our organization, like lots of organizations, did things, really with no moment's notice that had we not had a pandemic, it probably would have taken us 3 to 5 years to do, and we did it literally overnight. And so one of the lessons I'm taking from this is whenever we hear resistance to change, which we think is going to be for the better, it's not always about whether we have the ability to do it. It really is more about our attitudes around whatever those issues are. And so that's, I think, an important lesson I'm going to incorporate. I think a similar notion is our adaptability. And I was thinking about the other day that at the very beginning of the pandemic and the anxiety that all of us had around, were we going to be able to have enough toilet paper, for example, and all of those issues that became so huge in our lives, and how routine going to the grocery store is now. And that was a big deal at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so our ability to change and to adapt is much greater than we give ourselves capacity for. And I think one of the things we have to do as leaders is to tap into why is it that we can do that during crises, and what can we learn from those crises that we can take forward to help us when we're not in a crisis. I think another important lesson that I've learned is, and this one is sort of surprising, and it shouldn't be surprising, especially given that all three of us have PhDs in psychology. There are a lot of theories, there's a lot of research that we learn about, and we talk about these ideas and these theories as ways of informing how we make decisions. What I have been pleasantly surprised by is how much of that science has actually worked in real life situations. So for example, we've known for quite a while that that reducing people's uncertainty helps to reduce anxiety. And as a manager, that's one of the things that we want to do. And so we were very intentional about taking that principle from the research and integrating it into how we ran the organization. And so when we made decisions, for example, about how long we were going to be out, we made them with very long time frames, and we connected it to the school year so that parents throughout this pandemic had a lot of certainty about where they were going to be and how they were going to be operating. And just using that small principle actually turned out to be really important. And there were a lot of principles like that we used. So that was sort of a pleasant surprise. We talk about these things sometimes as in theory, but when we actually introduce them into how we manage and lead, they actually make a big difference. And I think the last thing that I would mention is that the pandemic really has changed our world. And I want to use an analogy from my growing up in Florida. When I grew up in Florida, we had these really intense thunderstorms where, you could walk in a building, the sky is clear, it would then, you kind of look out and it's thunder and lightning. And then 30, 40 minutes later, it dries up and everything is, it doesn't look like anything happened. But in Florida, you also have hurricanes. And I've also walked outside of my home after a hurricane, and our world has changed, right? And I think the mental model that many people have is a thunderstorm, that this pandemic is going to go away and we're just going to go back to life the way it was. That's not what's happened. We've gone through a significant trauma to all of us, and it has fundamentally changed our world. And it's really important for me as a leader then to think about how has our world changed? How have those changes, and how should those changes then shape the decisions that I make as a leader? And I think that's true for all of us. Every single person has been affected, whether we recognize it or not. And the question for us is, how have I been affected? And what kinds of things can I do to compensate for those kinds of changes that have happened in my life?
Actually, if I can add to what Arthur said, I mean, thinking about the quote that you started us out with is, at the end of the day, we're human, no matter what title we have at work, and whether we work remotely or in the office, have kids, don't have kids, anything, we're human. And I think it was further amplified in the last 18 months when you think it's not just the COVID pandemic, but the murder of George Floyd and what that means for this country and what it has meant for this country. And then some folks just, were coming to realize some of the things that, I'll say as a white person, I may not have noticed before. And what that means, how to come to work as a leader, as just a person that we're all people, and how are we going to do that? And what does that mean to make everybody, what does it mean to have trust? What does it mean to have clarity around uncertainty, or comfort around uncertainty, and all of that's related to being human?
Great segue into my next question, which is around just as far as your roles as CEOs. We talked about what your, the lessons were, but how or has it, the role of the CEO changed? Oftentimes, especially in some of these larger organizations, people may not have access to you and wonder, what is that CEO doing? But how was your experience, and how do you expect it going forward to be different than it had been in the past? Who would like to start out? Arthur?
I'll start. I think in a few ways. One of the things that I think all of us are more sensitive to as CEOs is the mental health of our workforce. It's really clear that, and I've been doing actually a lot of talks and having a lot of interactions with people from the business community, the for-profit business community. They understand that their productivity, their profitability is directly tied to the well-being and the mental health of their workforce. And they're paying a lot of attention to that. So that's certainly one of the things that I've learned. And we're the American Psychological Association, so we were already sensitive to those things. But I think what this has helped me to understand as a CEO is how much attention and energy I need to pay attention. I need to focus on these issues, particularly for parents. The parents in our organization are thrilled with remote work, and it just shows you how much stress parents and we actually have data that show this, that parents are one of the groups that have experienced the highest levels of stress throughout the pandemic, right? And also the younger people are what we call Gen Z, that group that's just getting out of high school and going into college. That group is experiencing a lot of stress. So I think as a CEO, it's really important for us to recognize that there are these pockets within our workforce that are experiencing disproportionate levels of stress, and blanket policies don't cut it. They just don't cut it. There are unique things that I have to think about for those different constituencies, and make sure that our policies are not only good across the board, but we're understanding the unique challenges that some of our workforce experiences. So that's one of the things that I'm really changing in the way I go forward.
Thank you, Arthur. And
if I could just add to that.
Absolutely.
Nicole, and I think Arthur really has spoken to this. It's, the importance of empathy, of listening for the sake of understanding, of, more of my conversations, a much higher proportion of my conversations in these last 16 months start out with, how are you doing today? How do you feel? What would be helpful to you? What are the pain points you're experiencing? And that's a much bigger portion of the conversations. I think that will probably shift a bit again. Hopefully we get to, a healthier time, a time of more certainty, et cetera. But the importance of empathy, I think, has been hugely important. And then another role that didn't, the responsibility didn't change, but the way we executed it, for many of us, I think, has changed. Our role as the interface, the staff person who is accountable to our board of directors, who needs to work most directly, obviously, with the board of directors. I found myself early in the pandemic being clear with our board that unless they demanded otherwise, my intent was to keep them informed, but there were a lot of decisions that we needed to make. And I would keep them informed, but I wasn't going to be able to bring all the decisions to them. When we needed to make the decision to close our office and go all remote, when we needed to say to volunteers who had travel scheduled on behalf of ASHA, you must cancel your flights, whether there's a refund or not isn't the point, but we're putting a travel ban in place for your well-being. When we decided to increase the air ventilation in our building, et cetera, there were a lot of things where we were keeping the board informed, but I had that explicit contract with them, that explicit understanding. Again, I think the balance of that will adjust again at some point in the future, but that was a CEO responsibility to be clear about how we were going to be operating.
Thank you, Arlene. And to that end, we have another poll we wanted to ask. That is, before getting, well, how well do you think your staff leadership, so your CEO, your executive team, handled employee well-being over the last 18 months? So while we're on this topic, let's see what our audience thinks about that. And for those of you who might have missed it, I want to do a plug for Tara from APWA did a breakout session this afternoon, and it was in parallel with 2 other tracks. But a lot of what's being discussed now at kind of a higher level, she gave a lot of data and a lot of very specific tools and resources and suggestions on how to deal with well-being and self-care and the like. So I'd encourage you to download it after the conference. Maybe I have to respond to. Let's see. All right, good job, guys. So we look about 40% thought it was excellent, good, some bad. And thankfully not too many terribles or bads. So I think maybe CES as a resource too has helped a lot of the leadership in guiding their organizations through what was undeniably not only a very difficult 18 months, but we're not out of it, right? So to that end, what are you considering now? How do you think this transition is going? What questions are you getting asked, and how are you dealing with it? And I might start with you, Arlene.
We went into a soft reopening in May, where staff who want to come into our office are welcome to do so, but need to use a scheduling app so we can maintain appropriate distance and have contact tracing if we need to. We are planning for a date soon after, but we haven't set the firm date yet, after Labor Day, to move to a reopening. We are saying these are the plans we would like to be able to move forward with. However, number one, they could change in a moment's notice based upon health advisories. We are only going to do these things if it is safe to do so, but this is how we want to proceed. And we're also saying, number two, we're piloting these things. We are asking everybody to come back to our office for at least 40% of their time. We will not have any fully remote workers, at least for the foreseeable future. That might change, but we want to get everybody back into the office and reacclimate with one another and reaffirm our experience of working together and knowing one another. We are going to increase aspects of we've had telework policies since the 1990s. We're going to enhance that and provide more flexibility. So we're making some changes, but we do want, and we're posting them as we're going to learn this together. We think this is the right direction to go. Let's try them. Let's see how they work. We can add, we can expand on them, or we can adjust them if needed. And we as an employer have made the decision that we are requiring vaccination. So we actually will be talking more about that, all of that in detail at an all staff meeting next week. So we're trying to be clear about designing our next phase, but also responsible about how it actually rolls out in terms of timing, and clear that it's going to be a learning phase and we're in it together.
Thanks, Arlene. Elena, would you like to address that and tell us
Sure.
about what you're working on now and how you're going about in that decision-making process?
So it's similar to Arlene in that we want to take a pilot approach. And for me, it's not just piloting because we're not sure what the world's going to be like, but it's also piloting as a role model of this is how I want. And I think most of us would say we want all of our staff to treat almost everything we work on, whether it's a new product or an iterative process change. It's like, let's try and, this fail fast and iterate type of mentality. And so let's actually put that into work for what we're talking about in terms of our own working style. So we came back, so we were out of the office, but then we opened up probably about a year ago for anybody who wanted to come in. And there was about 10% of staff that were in the office every day because they wanted to be there for whatever reason. And we're lucky, we have a nice space. We have about 55 individuals and almost everybody has their own office. So that was nicer for them to come in for some of them. And then what we asked folks to do is starting after July 4th weekend, come in 1 day a week, their choice for 2 months. And then after Labor Day, we're going up to 2 days a week, and that's kind of regular work. So it used to be that people could work from home 1 day a week. This is pre-pandemic, pre-me at the organization, and now it's up to 3 days a week that they can work from home. And the thinking is that we'll, in November, after 2 months of that, we'll say, okay, how's it going? What do we want to change? Should we have a common day in the office? How's it going? Are there a couple people that might want to work at home full-time, remote? Like, what does that look like, and entertain that? So really just trying to be flexible and iterate and learn. And then just quickly, I mean, in terms of the vaccine, we're not mandating the vaccine, but thankfully we have 95% of our staff who are vaccinated. But it is, one of the things about, you asked earlier, what's the role, how has the role changed? And I think one thing are these really big decisions, like, do you mandate vaccines? Like, do you mandate something going into someone's body? Is not typically something that one would have to discuss as a CEO, at least I don't think so. So I think those are the things that, and I think depending on where we're going, we might change where we're going to go, and maybe we would mandate vaccines for on-site work. We are mandating it to travel to our annual conference for our staff. So that we have done. That's about it.
Thank you, Elena. And I did type a question into the chat if, as we're coming up on our final 15 minutes, to ask folks to please share in the chat things that you liked that your organization implemented, things that you didn't like that your organization implemented, and any questions that you might want asked of the panelists. So one of the questions here was about the vaccine, and if we have a cesspool on which organizations are requiring vaccines. And no, we do not have that pull in advance, but that's something that I'm sure we can use the online community for and get some information on. And I'm going to actually pass the baton here over to Arthur just to let us know how is APA handling that, and kind of also, I think, touching on what you just brought up, Elena. It's not just the staff, but then it's the implications of staff going out into the world to conferences, guests coming into the offices, and the mixing and the mingling that happens at our conferences and events. So it's a layered decision making that involves more than just the staff, probably. Arthur, do you want to take a crack at that?
Yeah, sure. It's really complicated. There are so many decisions that we have to make, and what we've said to our staff is the number one priority is the health and safety of our staff. We start there, and then secondly, ensuring that we can accomplish our mission and that we're productive and effective and efficient. So that's kind of how we've ordered our decision making, and that kind of drives then how we come down on a variety of issues. We've not made a decision about vaccines at this point, in part because we're not physically together yet, and won't be until next year, at least not in mass within our organization. We took the position that, and this goes back to sort of my philosophy about how do we think about what we've just come through. And we recognize that the world has changed, that we are going to have to change. And we're trying to take the lessons learned from the pandemic and carry them forward. And that includes, one of the things we learned, I'm sure all of you learned this, is that we can be very effective and efficient in a all virtual environment. In fact, we did it we've done it now for over a year and a half. And in fact, I think we're more productive in this virtual environment than we were pre-pandemic. I'm sure that we have lots of data that suggests that. So how do we not lose that, and we benefit from what Arlene was talking about earlier, that human interaction and the importance of human interaction. And so we're taking a systematic look, figuring out what we want our physical space to look like, what rules we'll have around working, whether people will be able to work remotely, whether they will be able to work from different states, from different countries. All of these things are just very complicated questions. And so rather than bring people back in, make those decisions, and then possibly have some disruption, what we've decided to do is to stay virtual through the beginning of next year. We have a planning committee that is working, and lots of subcommittees that are working through all of these issues. We've engaged our staff and committed to our staff that a committee isn't going to go off and come up with a plan and then come and spring it on them, but we're going to keep people apprised of the decisions of what we're learning along the way, so that by the time we get to the end of this process, no one is going to be surprised about the decisions that we make. And those decisions, as I said, number one is health and safety, but we also want to make sure that we are making decisions that will optimize our efficiency and effectiveness as an organization. There's a second parallel, parallel track that we are also working on. We actually were working on before the pandemic, and that is we're trying to create a learning organization, one that can adapt to changes within our environment. We were doing that pre-pandemic just because of what the world looked like. We absolutely know now that we have to do that, and we have to actually have to accelerate that work, because as we've seen just in the last couple of months, what we thought the world was going to look like now looks very different. I mean, you go back 30 days ago, now you have a new variant. We don't know what that's going to mean in terms of new policies around travel or anything else. And so, the way we view it is we're going into a world where there's going to continue to be a lot of uncertainty. There's going to continue to be a lot of changes, and we need an organization that is built in such a way that it can adapt to those changes. And so they're in parallel with this kind of organizational work that we're doing. We're also doing a level of work that's more around strategy and the culture that we're trying to build as an organization. And that's both fun and challenging, I would say.
Nicole, I just want to, this is a very concrete statement, but building on what Arthur was just saying, one of the explicit things that we've done is we've asked each team leader to engage the team members and to actually document the learnings. What have they been doing differently in their areas of responsibility over these past 16 months that they will carry forward And what have they not been able to do over these past 16 months that they want to be able to resume when it's possible. So again, that very intentional design the next phase and to take the learnings with us. None of us are going back to, like, I can't imagine any of us are going back to, doing things the way we did in February of 2020. It's actively learn and design the next phase.
I love that idea of asking everybody for those lessons learned. We haven't done that, but it makes me think about productivity, because sometimes we're seeing productivity has grown, but then I'm reading some research work that says the same amount of work's being done, but it's taking people from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. because they're never shutting off. So they're doing more, but they're spending a lot more time, which is actually could be a decrease in the productivity. So that does concern me. So I like that idea. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things about the productivity is it comes at a cost. And one of the things that we're noticing is that our staff, are experiencing a lot of stress. And in fact, we've been very intentional about doing things to try to minimize that. We've given 2 mental health days since the pandemic started. So we will give people the day off. I'll send out a note that says no emails, no calls. And actually, I got staff that sent me thank you notes because, I'm sure you all have these kind of employees too. They're high performing. They're very committed. You give them a day off, they're still going to work, right? And so we wanted to make sure that people really use it as a mental health day. And so, I sent a note saying, making that the norm, that we don't do any kind of communication. And people sent me notes saying thank you because they would have worked or they would have gotten an email, that kind of stuff. So, doing those kinds of things, having lots of communication with the staff, I think is really important. I try to meet with the staff at least once a month and just no agenda other than I talk a little bit and then let them ask questions. Those small things, I think we have to, back to sort of the lessons learned, I think it takes a lot of different things that we have to do. There's no one intervention that we can do as managers. But if we put all of those things together, that we're listening, we're being transparent, we're acknowledging mental health, we're bringing in resources, we're surveying them, asking their opinion, all of those things collectively, I think, create an environment where people feel like, okay, they're listening and they care about me. And I think that makes a big difference in terms of how people manage the stress.
Yeah, we've got some great conversations here going on in the chat. But I wanted to go back real quickly before we do our closing thoughts. We're almost up on the hour. But Arlene, you had mentioned about kind of that asking what's going to stay and what might go. What we're finding anyway is a lot we want to keep. And now we're looking at adding back all the things that we had been doing before. And that's really stressful. And building that capacity and getting that capacity back when everyone already is in the state of fatigue and exhaustion. So do any of you want to talk about, like, how are we going to pace ourselves, and are we going to be able to pace ourselves, or transitioning back? It was one thing when everyone was on the same kind of playing field, and now we're going back to a much more varied workplace. So but both in terms of the office as well as our organizations and our members' expectations. Sorry.
One thing that I think is important for us to do is to be intentional about taking things off of people's plates. So we can talk about, mental health days and those kinds of things, which are important. But if we don't do something as managers to help deal with the workload issue, it kind of falls on deaf ears. And so, and it's hard. I've worked in 3 different organizations where I have explicitly asked people, what can you stop doing? And it's hard for people to do that. Ask your staff, what can you take off your plate? They feel like everything is important, and everything isn't equally important. And so I think as leaders and managers, we have to have formal processes to say, we're not going to do X anymore. That's, yes, we've done that for 30 years. And I know Bob Smith, this constituent really loves that, but that's not where we're trying to go as an organization. And that's really tough, especially for membership organizations where no matter what our staff is doing, there's at least one constituent out there who feels very passionately about it, usually more than that. And it complicates our ability to stop doing things, but I think it's important.
So one specific process that we're going to be piloting in our reentry or reopening is a much more detailed approach to our shared calendar. You know, we all have a shared, we all participate in, we have an Outlook system, we all have access to one another's calendars. But we're going to be asking folks to put down the start and end of their workday, the days when they are working remotely, the days when they're working in the office, so that if we want to have a face-to-face collaboration, it'll be more clear about when we'll be available to do that, and that we can be more mindful of, you know, if we're giving people the additional flexibility of working across the time frame of the day, then if someone's starting their day at 4 a.m. and they're expecting me to respond, well, I'm not going to be up at 4 a.m. But conversely, when I'm catching up at the end of the day at 11 p.m., you know, maybe that's not a good time for me to shoot them off an email. So just to try to be more aware of people's schedules and not have this kind of 24/7 mindset of access to availability to one another. Because, you know, I think the point's really well taken. We encourage folks to set limits, but how do we operationalize that so that it's really comfortable for everybody to do it?
I think that it leads back to how some of this role has changed. And, you know, as Arthur said, you know, we're not doing a one size fits all rules anymore, because it's not about, you know, that was back in the days when everything was supposed to be equal. But no, it's equity. It's making sure that people have that same access to their, you know, if people are in the flow with work between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m., I can't understand those people. But if they are, you know, let them do that. But I'm in the flow from 2 to 6 p.m. that is. So, you know, it doesn't have to be equal. It just has to be equitable.
Any final thoughts? We are coming up on our last 2 minutes, and I want to give each of you a chance, maybe a takeaway on something. How about something that you're going to continue yourself or you're going to give up going into this? Something you did differently that you're going to hold on to, or something you've been doing that you're looking forward to stopping and doing?
I'm going to keep communicating that there's a lot of uncertainty, but in that world of uncertainty, I will make sure that there are no surprises as best I can.
And I heard you say once too, Elena, which I've documented, it's okay to be okay.
It is okay. It's
So
okay to
give
not be
yourself
okay.
grace.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah,
Arthur?
I think that one of the things, and I'm not good at this, so I'm admitting this, is being intentional about taking care of oneself. The thing, you know, I talked about that all of us have been affected, whether we recognize it or not. I think just being aware of what are your warning signs of stress. I know I get a little cynical. I'm not a cynical person at all. But when I'm stressed, I start to say things like, why is this on my calendar? And then they usually tell me, because you told me to put it on your calendar. And then I go, oh, okay. So I know that's a warning sign for me, and that I need to kind of take some time off. So if you're a person that, you know, you needed, you know, a vacation once every 6 months, maybe now you need it once every 3 months, because you're under a different level of stress. So just trying to be a little bit conscious about that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's for me, that's the carry forward. It's that self-care. Obviously, you know, I'll be moving into a different phase of life sometime in the not too distant future. But that awareness of what is it that keeps you grounded, that keeps you healthy, that keeps you in a position to be able to, in a mindset and a position to be able to be an effective leader, to really help foster a healthy environment and good decision making. During the last 18 months, one of the things I started to do, because so much of our lives are now lived in facing the screen. And I'm so grateful for what we've been able to do, the platforms we've had available. But the idea of it's time to unplug and I'm going to watch something on Netflix just didn't feel a lot like unplugging. So I have a stack of books that are, there's always the next one ready. And I can't do it every night, but a lot of evenings I'll get to a point where I get a glass of wine and I go sit literally in a rocking chair and I pick up the book and it just takes me to a different place. That was one thing for me, but that intentionality of, what makes a difference, what helps you to stay healthy.
Thank you so much, all of you, Arlene, Arthur, Elena, for a very candid and insightful presentation. And as we've heard throughout this conference, disruption and change appears to be the new norm. So I hope we can continue these important conversations throughout the year and, of course, be there for each other. So with that, we're going to close this session. I have one last announcement here. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I want to invite you to grab a drink and unwind with your colleagues and partners one last time at the closing reception. I know it's not the same, but it's as close as we can do this year. And we really appreciate all of you being with us virtually. We want to make sure that you save the date now for next year's in-person, that's right, in-person Access 2022 Leadership Conference, July 19th to the 21st in Richmond, Virginia. And last, please complete your session evaluation forms and surveys to ensure that we continue to deliver impactful sessions. Our 2022 group is getting ready right after this to start planning for next year, and all those forms and comments are read and considered. So please take a moment and do that. Thanks again, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in Richmond. Bye now.